The town of Harmony Creek held a secret, a spooky secret. Locals whispered about it, the vanishing house, an old eerie mansion on the outskirts of town. It was said to disappear, vanishing into thin air, and then reappearing, always in a different spot. Some dismissed it as a silly myth, others believed. They told stories about the house's original owners, a wealthy family cursed by a vengeful spirit. Legend had it that the house would only find peace when the curse was lifted. But who would dare try? Jack and Emily were different, not your average couple. They craved adventure, thrived on the thrill of the unknown. So, when they heard about Harmony Creek and its vanishing house, they were immediately hooked. They packed their bags and drove to the small town, ready for anything. Little did they know what awaited them. Harmony Creek seemed like any other quaint town. At first, but the minute they crossed the town line, a strange feeling washed over them. It was a foggy evening when they arrived. The air was thick with moisture. An unnatural chill hung in the air. As they drove, streetlights flickered, casting long, creepy shadows. They found the house at the edge of town, just as the locals described, hidden amidst a cluster of gnarled trees. The fog seemed to cling to it, almost hiding it, almost.
Are you sure about this?
Of course, let's go.
The front door creaked open as if inviting them in. Inside, the house was dark and silent. Dust covered everything. Cobwebs hung from the chandeliers. The air felt heavy, difficult to breathe, as if a weight pressed down on their chests. They heard it first as a whisper, a soft, mournful cry. Then a cold breeze swept through the hallway, extinguished their only source of light. Jack fumbled for his lighter. The flame flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. They could hear their hearts pounding. They cautiously moved deeper into the house, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The air was thick with an unsettling chill, and every creak of the floorboards sent shivers down their spines. Shadows danced on the walls, creating the illusion of movement in the corners of their eyes. Each room was colder than the last. The whispers grew louder, almost as if the house itself was trying to communicate with them. The temperature dropped noticeably with each step they took, and their breath became visible in the frigid air. The whispers seemed to come from all directions, making it impossible to pinpoint their source.
This place, it feels like it's alive. The walls seem to pulse with a life of their own, and the very air feels charged with a malevolent energy. It's as if the house is watching us, waiting for the right moment to reveal its secrets.
They entered a room at the end of the hallway and stopped dead in their tracks. The room was shrouded in darkness, and an overwhelming sense of dread washed over them. It was as if they had stepped into another world, one where the rules of reality no longer applied. A ghostly figure hovered in the middle of the room. It was translucent, almost ethereal, and seemed to glow with an otherworldly light. The figure's presence was both mesmerizing and terrifying, drawing them in while simultaneously filling them with an instinctual urge to flee. A woman in a white gown. Her dress flowed around her like mist, and she seemed to float above the ground. The gown was old-fashioned, reminiscent of a bygone era, and added to the sense of timelessness that surrounded her. Her face was pale and sorrowful. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Her eyes were filled with a deep, unending sadness, and it was clear that she had been suffering for a long time. The sight of her tears was heart-wrenching, and they felt an overwhelming urge to help her despite their fear.
Oh my God! The words escaped their lips before they could stop themselves. The sheer shock of seeing the ghostly woman left them momentarily speechless, and they could feel their heart pounding in their chest.
Emily gasped. She had heard stories of the Lady in White, but seeing her in person was an entirely different experience. The reality of the situation hit her like a ton of bricks, and she struggled to process what she was witnessing. Jack just stared, frozen in place. His mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, but he couldn't bring himself to move. The sight of the ghostly woman had paralyzed him with fear, and he felt as if he was trapped in a nightmare from which he couldn't wake up. The woman glided towards them. Her movements were smooth and graceful, almost as if she was moving through water. There was an otherworldly elegance to her, and they couldn't help but be captivated by her presence. Her voice, when she spoke, was a mournful whisper. It was filled with a deep, aching sorrow that tugged at their hearts. The sound of her voice seemed to echo in the room, amplifying the sense of despair that hung in the air.
"Help me, break the curse." Her plea was filled with desperation, and it was clear that she had been trapped in this state for a long time. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air, and they knew that they had to find a way to help her, no matter the cost.
The woman explained everything. Her voice was filled with a mix of sorrow and urgency, as if the weight of centuries rested upon her shoulders. She was the wife of the original owner, a man whose ambition had led them down a dark path. Her husband had made a deal with a dark entity. In exchange for wealth and prosperity, he had promised their souls. The promise was made in a moment of desperation, a decision that would haunt them for eternity. The entity had tricked them, as dark entities often do, with promises of grandeur that masked the true cost. Trapped their souls within the house, binding them to its walls and corridors, condemned to roam its halls for eternity, their spirits unable to find peace.
Only one thing could break the curse: a ritual, ancient and powerful, that required specific items and precise timing. A ritual performed on the night of the full moon, which is tonight. The urgency in her voice was palpable.
The woman gave them instructions, her eyes pleading for their help. They had to act quickly, for the window of opportunity was narrow. They had to find 3 items hidden within the house: a silver candle, which symbolized purity and light, an old book containing the incantations needed for the ritual, and a locket, a personal item that held sentimental value.
We have to do this, Emily. The determination in his voice was clear, a resolve to set things right. We have to help her. The weight of the task ahead was heavy, but they knew they couldn't turn back now.
Let's find those items. The urgency in their movements mirrored the ticking clock, each second bringing them closer to the full moon. We don't have much time. The sands of time were slipping away, and with it, their chance to break the curse and free the trapped souls.
Jack and Emily searched frantically, following the woman's guidance.
We have to hurry.
They found the silver candle hidden inside a grandfather clock. The old book was tucked away in a dusty bookshelf. Finally, they discovered the locket hidden beneath the floorboards in the attic. As they gathered the items, the house began to tremble. The fog outside grew denser, swirling around the house. They raced back to the room where they had met the woman. Their footsteps echoed through the eerie, dimly lit corridors, each step filled with urgency and fear. The air was thick with tension, and the shadows seemed to dance around them, as if mocking their desperation. The ghostly figure was waiting, her presence both ethereal and unsettling. She stood there, almost floating, her form shimmering in the faint light that barely penetrated the room. Her eyes filled with a glimmer of hope, a silent plea for help that spoke volumes. It was as if she knew they were her last chance, her final hope for salvation.
"Please hurry!" The urgency in her voice was palpable, a stark contrast to the stillness of her ghostly form. It was a desperate cry that pierced through the silence, urging them to act quickly.
They performed the ritual as instructed, their hands trembling as they followed the ancient steps. The room was filled with the soft glow of candlelight, casting long shadows on the walls. Placing the silver candle on the floor, they could feel the weight of the moment. This was it, the culmination of their efforts. They opened the old book, its pages yellowed with age and filled with cryptic symbols. The air seemed to grow colder as they turned each page, the weight of history pressing down on them, and placed the locket inside it. The locket, a small but significant artifact, seemed to pulse with a life of its own as it settled into the book's pages. As they finished, a blinding light filled the room. The house shook violently, as if reacting to the powerful forces they had unleashed. The light was so intense that it seemed to pierce through their very souls. They closed their eyes, bracing themselves for whatever was to come. The air was filled with a deafening roar, and they could feel the ground trembling beneath their feet.
Hold on! The shout was barely audible over the cacophony, but it was a lifeline, a reminder to stay grounded amidst the chaos.
When they opened their eyes, they were outside. The sudden change in scenery was disorienting, the cool night air a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere inside the house. The fog was beginning to recede, revealing the dark, twisted shapes of the trees around them. The landscape, once shrouded in mystery, was slowly coming into focus. And the house was gone. Where it once stood, there was now only an empty spot, a void that seemed to swallow the very memory of its existence. The silence was deafening, a stark reminder of the supernatural events that had just transpired. They stood there for a long moment, catching their breath, trying to process what they had just experienced.
Had it all been real?
Or just a figment of our imaginations?
They had no answers, only more questions. The vanishing house of Harmony Creek had vanished once again, taking its secrets with it, leaving behind a lingering sense of mystery. The town was quiet, as if holding its breath. Jack and Emily left Harmony Creek the next day. They didn't speak much about their experience, but they both knew they would never forget it. The vanishing house had vanished for now, but legends have a way of resurfacing. And somewhere, in some forgotten corner of the world, a house might materialize out of thin air, waiting for its next victims, or perhaps its next saviors. Only time would tell.